Hi, my name is Carly Kattenberg, and today we are going to be going over the Corinthians. When studying any book of the Bible, it's really important to begin with the context: the who, what, when, and where. So let's start with who. Paul is writing to the church in Corinth. Corinth was a mixed population of Greeks, Jews, and Romans. Corinthianize was a Greek word for extreme sexual immorality. This tells you the type of people that were living within Corinth. Paul wrote to a community struggling with a culture war. They had a failure to relate to one another in love. The local church leaders were struggling with competition for status. They were denied the importance of the body or the church, and there was tension on the different teachings of sex. Context: the what. Overall, Paul writes 4 letters to the church in Corinth. 1 Corinthians was actually his second letter, and it shows us the life through the lens of the gospel and presents 5 problems: division, sex, food, gathering, and the resurrection. 2 Corinthians assures them of Paul's love. Paul reconciles with the Corinthians, forgotten generosity, and the paradox of the cross. The when. 1 Corinthians was written by Paul in AD 55 in Ephesus, where 2 Corinthians was written a short time later in AD 56 in Macedonia. The church had begun to question the things that Paul had originally taught them during his first missionary journey. And this was a time, an age of worshiping pagan gods. There were temples all over Corinth. The where. Corinth was a port city located on an isthmus that was 4 miles across. That doesn't seem very far. It was located between the Ionian and the Aegean Sea. Delakos, or a paved track so that the boats could be moved over the land instead of around the Peloponnesus. To go around the Peloponnesus, it took much longer and was much more dangerous. So this created a faster and safer route. One of the main things that Paul talks about in 1 Corinthians, or the gathering, is spiritual gifts. Charismata is Greek for spiritual gifts, with the root meaning grace. To correct the Corinthians' misunderstanding of spiritual gifts, Paul focuses on the gift's source, the triune God. Spiritual gifts express diversity within unity. And Paul also talks about how love defines the character and expression of the gifts. Spiritual gifts. Paul goes over the value, the purpose, and not the purpose. The value of spiritual gifts are subject to the sovereignty of God. They're confirmed by character and conduct, and they're conforming to the biblical truth. The purpose of spiritual gifts are to arrest the attention of the apathetic, convince the critical and cautious, and manifest divine dynamic, and give great glory to God. Not the purpose is to promote personality, excessive emotional enjoyment, and opportunity to covet. The spiritual gifts mentioned in 1 Corinthians 12 are the word of wisdom, the word of knowledge, faith, gifts of healing, works of miracles, prophecy, discerning of spiritual gifts, different kinds of tongues, interpretation of tongues, gifts of helping, gifts of administration. The root of division is spiritual pride. Divisions resulted from misunderstanding God's wisdom. God's wisdom makes sense of the cross, and Christian leaders must lead by word and example. Paul talks about many other things in the book of Corinthians to challenge the Corinthians' way of thinking. Thank you so much for listening. This is The Corinthians by Carly Kattenberg.